With the recent announcement that Ubisoft will be updating Rainbow Six Siege for its 10th anniversary, I got to thinking, what the hell happened to the Tom Clancy brand? Once a paragon of more realistic titles that put an emphasis on military tactics and careful play, the brand has fallen out of favor at Ubisoft and hasn't seen a proper entry since 2022's Rainbow Six Extraction, which is about as far from embodying the original ideals of the Tom Clancy brand as possible. These games were once a major innovator in the games industry, and have now become a mere footnote of titles that Ubisoft produces. Some of this likely has to do with the financial troubles Ubisoft has been facing in the past few years, but I've been complaining about the lack of realism in Tom Clancy games since the 2019 release of Ghost Recon Breakpoint. In my review in progress that I wrote for Destructoid, a sentiment I pondered was, what would Tom Clancy think of this? Ubisoft had the perfect opportunity with that game to build on the blueprint set by Ghost Recon Wildlands, but instead forced in a bunch of live service nonsense and looter-shooter systems that made the experience play more like an RPG rather than a tactical shooter. How ridiculous is it that in a Tom Clancy game, characters will wear armor fashioned like a beanie that allows them to soak up bullets better? When the original Rainbow Six was released on PC in 1998, it basically single-handedly created the tactical shooter subgenre. While there were some games that had attempted to be more realistic before developer Red Storm Entertainment adapted Clancy's novel to game form, nothing even came close to the attention to detail and immersion that Rainbow Six provided. The typical shooter in that era was something like Doom or Quake. You ran around with a wide variety of weapons and were able to soak up tons of damage before dying. Hell, in Quake, you could fling yourself in the air by shooting rockets at your feet. Not in Rainbow Six. Some people may not have the fondest memories of the original Rainbow Six game, as its console ports were not great. The PlayStation version in particular was awful, and while it did retain a lot of what made the PC version so unique, it was so cumbersome to play that it wasn't worth the effort. For PC players, however, this was completely uncharted territory, and the degree of skill required to actually finish missions made it thrilling. The execution by Red Storm Entertainment ushered in a new era of shooters that focused on realism above player fantasy, which is exactly what Tom Clancy was hoping for when he started his brand. While Clancy's novels had been adapted into games before the founding of Red Storm in 1996, he was instrumental in making that company come to light. Clancy, along with former British Royal Navy nuclear attack submarine captain Doug Littlejohns, started the company as a way to continue producing games associated with Clancy's novels. Following the release of the 1996 game Tom Clancy's SSN by developer Virtus Corporation, everyone bounded together under Red Storm, which got its name from the novel Red Storm Rising, to create new experiences that upheld the authenticity Clancy's novels were known for. What followed was a series of incredible tactical military games that focused mostly on first-person shooting. I've already mentioned Rainbow Six, but Ghost Recon was another excellent game that differentiated itself from the former by putting a focus on larger maps and stealthier tactics. When Ubisoft acquired Red Storm in 2000, it was quick to place the name on a then-in-development title known as The Drift. A sci-fi, James Bond-inspired title with gameplay similar to Metal Gear Solid 2, The Drift would become known as Splinter Cell, and while it wasn't actually created by Clancy, it embodied all of the ideals that his brand was known for. It was mostly realistic, punishingly difficult, had military intrigue, and forced players to embody the role of its main character. During the sixth console generation, the Tom Clancy brand exploded in popularity thanks to games such as Splinter Cell. It was the first exposure a lot of people had to the author, and even if he wasn't completely involved, he was endorsing it. As such, that seal of quality made Ubisoft's next few Xbox titles massive hits. Ghost Recon on Xbox retained most of what made the PC version so enjoyable, but included a massive suite of Xbox Live options. Ushering in online play to the console crowd, this was followed up with an Xbox port of Rainbow Six 3 Raven Shield that dropped the subtitle and put more of an emphasis on action. You could argue that this game was the beginning of where the Clancy brand would become diluted, but seeing as how gamepads were simply not equipped to handle the same kind of depth that a mouse and keyboard allowed then, Rainbow Six 3 was a smart adaptation of the series for a new crowd. It also had tons of online options, extensive co-op support, and some of the first DLC available on the market. There were some stumbles along the way. 2002's The Sum of All Fears is a truly awful game, but for the most part, you could buy a Tom Clancy product and get a reliably great game from it. Splinter Cell continued to innovate with online multiplayer in its subsequent sequels, while Ghost Recon got an interesting console sequel that shifted to third-person action and introduced a co-op exclusive campaign. This trend followed into the 7th console generation, when Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter hit the Xbox 360 in 2006 and felt like a truly monumental leap in both gameplay and graphical fidelity. While I could continue recapping the history of the brand, I think one thing should be evident by now. Seeing Tom Clancy on a box meant you were in for a good time. It also typically meant that the game in question was going to push the envelope for its genre in an interesting direction. So far, all of the games I've mentioned were major innovators for their respective franchises and the industry, but nothing can last forever. While fans now have a soft spot for Rainbow Six Vegas, at the time it was seen as a further dumbing down of the tactical shooter genre that began with Rainbow Six Lockdown. Splinter Cell Double Agent also had Ubisoft quickly shambling together a next-generation version that dropped most of the features it had been teasing simply to pump up the visual detail for HD TVs. The PS2 and Xbox versions of Double Agent are vastly superior games. Where things really went off the rails was with the 2008 release of Tom Clancy's End War. While a real-time strategy game seems perfect for the Clancy branding, and could even realistically host a Ghost Recon title, it was created with consoles in mind, and as such, is lacking in depth. Set in the then near future of 2016, the world has entered World War III, and each nation is fighting with fancy technology that couldn't ever possibly exist. It was an ambitious concept, but it didn't quite feel at home with Clancy's own works, which often featured speculative writing about future technology done in a grounded manner. It was really with the Hawk series where the branding stopped meaning anything. I'll give developer Ubisoft Bucharest props for trying to differentiate the type of military action that the Tom Clancy name could house, but Hawks felt like an arcade-focused installment of Ace Combat, which is already pretty arcadey to begin with. With this game and its sequel, it truly felt like Ubisoft was simply farming Clancy's name out to prop up games that otherwise would have never been made. I think nothing speaks to that assumption more than The Division, Ubisoft's stab at making its own destiny that latches onto the Tom Clancy branding simply because it's set in New York City? I'm not even really sure where that came from, and no matter how decent of a game The Division is, it's not a Tom Clancy title. Watch Dogs has more in common with Tom Clancy than The Division, a game where you and some of your friends run around the streets of a dystopian version of NYC, shooting people wearing sweatshirts and beanies with entire clips from your gun without killing them. The game certainly has tactical elements, but it's so far removed from realism that I have to wonder if the developers even knew they were making a Tom Clancy game when they started it. Ghost Recon then took a nosedive in quality with 2017's Wildlands. Despite being one of the best-selling games of that year, I've always found the level of quality to be shockingly poor. When playing with my friend, we'd routinely have characters floating through the air, missions failing to spawn mission-critical NPCs, and guns that couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. All of that got worse with Breakpoint. But even then, a few bad games shouldn't derail an entire brand, right? You would think so, but ever since 2013, it seems Ubisoft has simply stopped emphasizing the Tom Clancy branding. I know I've spoken about 3 different games released after that period which feature his name, but in the last decade, only 6 Tom Clancy games have hit store shelves. One other game was a mobile exclusive that was shuttered a year after its launch. I understand that game development is hard, and games simply take longer to make nowadays, especially the ones at the level of fidelity Ubisoft constantly pushes for. Still, why has Splinter Cell not seen an installment since 2013, despite the crippling lack of stealth action games on the market? Why did Ghost Recon morph into a looter shooter with a design cribbed from Far Cry instead of honing back in on its original premise? How did The Division, as much as I may not enjoy that, actually see its standalone game get cancelled while its 3rd installment remains stuck in limbo? Rainbow Six Siege, surprisingly, is still going, but why was the co-op spin-off focused on an alien invasion of all things? Ubisoft was developing a VR Splinter Cell game, but that was cancelled. The announced remake also hasn't seen a single update since 2021. Ghost Recon was set to get a standalone title that was unceremoniously cancelled in 2022. Rainbow Six is simply getting a visual update versus a brand new installment. It feels as if Ubisoft doesn't know what to do with the branding anymore. Maybe I'm speaking too early on this and we'll soon learn about a slew of Tom Clancy games hitting PC and consoles soon. Maybe other games over the years have supplanted what the Tom Clancy name stood for and rendered the entire brand moot. Think Counter-Strike and Call of Duty. Maybe I'm overreacting to a problem only I care about. At any rate, I've been very displeased with how Ubisoft has handled this franchise, and really hope it will start to do something interesting with it again. If nothing else, just re-release the older games so anyone confused by this rant can understand why I'm so invested in the topic.